The cabin shakes violently. Oxygen masks drop. Passengers scream as the plane starts to dive. Suddenly, the cockpit door flies open. The bloodied captain scans the first-class cabin frantically until his eyes lock onto her. The quiet woman everyone ignored, now fully awake. "Firebird!" he shouts above the chaos. Authorization Delta Crimson 847. The cabin falls silent. All eyes turn to Seat 2B. The red-haired woman by the window rises slowly. Her transformation from anonymous passenger to commanding officer instant and mesmerizing. No one had noticed her before. Now no one can look away. The first-class cabin of Atlantic Flight 629 hummed with quiet luxury. Soft lighting illuminated the spacious leather seats as the plane cruised at 37,000 feet, somewhere over the Midwest. Flight attendants moved with practiced grace through the cabin, offering champagne and warm towels to passengers settling in for the 6-hour transcontinental journey. In Seat 2B sat Dr. Aurora Hayes, a woman whose understated appearance belied her extraordinary past. Her striking red hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her tailored charcoal suit immaculate but unremarkable. To casual observers, she appeared to be just another business executive, perhaps a consultant or corporate lawyer. Nothing about her commanded special attention, which was precisely how she preferred it. Her emerald green eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences far beyond the corporate boardroom, though she kept them carefully neutral, focused on the thriller novel in her lap. "Champagne, ma'am." Flight attendant Emma Rodriguez leaned slightly, offering a tray of flutes filled with golden bubbles. Aurora glanced up, her gaze clear and alert. "No thank you. Just water for now." Emma smiled professionally and moved on to the next passenger. Across the aisle, Tech CEO Blake Harrison accepted his second glass with boisterous enthusiasm. "Excellent vintage," he announced to no one in particular, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Though I prefer the 2015 Bollinger they serve on Emirates first." Aurora returned her attention to her book, but Harrison wasn't finished broadcasting his importance. Heading to the Aviation Expo in San Francisco, he informed his seatmate, a weary-looking businessman who had already donned noise-canceling headphones. "I'm giving the keynote on private aviation innovations. My company just acquired a flight simulator manufacturer, top-of-the-line technology." The businessman nodded politely without removing his headphones. Undeterred, Harrison continued expounding on his extensive knowledge of aircraft, speaking loudly enough that several rows could hear his self-proclaimed expertise. Aurora checked her watch, a simple but sturdy timepiece with a dark military-style face that stood out against her slim wrist. The motion caught Harrison's attention. "That's an interesting choice," he remarked, leaning across the aisle toward her. "Isn't that a men's pilot watch? Bit chunky for a lady, don't you think?" Aurora met his gaze with a neutral expression. "It tells time accurately. That's all I require of it." "Fair enough," Harrison chuckled condescendingly. "Though if you're interested in aviation timepieces, I could recommend something more suited to your delicate wrist size. I have quite the collection myself." "I'm sure you do," Aurora replied, returning to her book with a finality that would have discouraged most people. Harrison, however, was not most people. "Been flying private for years," he continued. "Get to know the pilots pretty well. Always fascinating to watch them work. I've picked up enough that I could probably handle the controls in a pinch." When Aurora didn't respond, he finally turned his attention elsewhere, leaving her to the peaceful solitude she preferred. The plane encountered a brief patch of turbulence, a slight jostle that barely disturbed the passengers' drinks. Aurora's hand instinctively gripped the armrest, her knuckles whitening momentarily before she consciously relaxed her fingers. Her eyes flicked toward the window, assessing the cloud formations with professional scrutiny rather than a passenger's curiosity. For a fleeting second, her mind flashed to another cockpit, another moment of turbulence, alarms blaring as her hands gripped flight controls with the same precision now directed toward her book. She blinked the memory away as quickly as it had come. Captain Marcus Sterling's voice came over the intercom, smooth and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're receiving reports of an unexpected weather system developing along our route. We'll be adjusting our course slightly to maintain a comfortable journey. Current flight time remains approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare for possible light turbulence. The announcement prompted a fresh wave of commentary from Harrison. Weather systems this time of year can be tricky. I was telling my pilot just last week that the jet stream patterns have been unusually volatile. If I were flying this bird, I'd climb another few thousand feet to get above it completely. Aurora reached into her carry-on bag and retrieved a small pill case, extracting a single white tablet. As Emma passed by again, she requested another water. "Are you feeling unwell?" Emma asked with professional concern. "Just hoping to get some sleep," Aurora replied. "Would you mind waking me only if absolutely necessary?" Emma nodded, noting the unusual specificity of the request. "Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure you're not disturbed unless it's important." "Thank you." Aurora swallowed the tablet with a sip of water, then reclined her seat slightly. Her movements were precise and economical, each action executed with an efficiency that spoke of rigorous training rather than mere habit. As she closed her eyes, Harrison's voice continued to dominate the cabin atmosphere. "My extensive simulator experience has taught me that these Airbus models handle crosswinds differently than Boeing's. It's all about understanding the thrust vectors and control surfaces." Aurora took a deep breath and allowed herself to drift towards sleep, her consciousness fading as the drone of the engines and Harrison's pontificating blended into white noise. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was a mental calculation of their position over the continent, a professional habit she had never managed to break. An hour into the flight, the first hints of trouble manifested in the cockpit. Captain Sterling frowned at the instrument panel as First Officer Jake Morrison ran through routine checks. "Pressure reading seems off in hydraulic system 3, Jake noted. "Within parameters but fluctuating." "Monitor it," Sterling instructed. "Could be a sensor issue." "How's our weather looking now?" "Storm cell is intensifying faster than forecast," Jake replied, studying the radar. "We've got good clearance on the north side, though." The plane encountered another patch of turbulence, more pronounced this time. In the first-class cabin, a few passengers looked up from their laptops and tablets. Aurora remained asleep, her breathing deep, and even despite the disturbance, Harrison seized the opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge. "Classic clear air turbulence," he announced to nearby passengers. "Perfectly normal, though if they'd chosen a better route, we wouldn't be experiencing it at all." Young flight attendant Zoe Mitchell moved through the cabin, checking that passengers had their seatbelts fastened. She paused briefly beside Aurora's seat, noting how the sleeping woman remained perfectly still despite the intermittent jostling. Most sleeping passengers would shift or stir during turbulence, but Aurora appeared unnaturally composed, as though her body had been trained to maintain stability even in unconsciousness. Back in the cockpit, the situation was becoming more complex. "Hydraulic pressure still fluctuating," Jake reported. "And now System 2 is showing similar patterns. Could be coincidence, but both at once seems unlikely." Captain Sterling nodded grimly. "Let's run full diagnostics and alert maintenance to have a team ready at our destination. Better to be thorough." As Jake initiated the diagnostic sequence, a small alert appeared on another screen. "Captain, we've got an anomaly in the electrical bus distribution." Sterling frowned. "That's unrelated to hydraulics. Run a cross-check." The turbulence increased as they continued their flight path, the plane occasionally dipping and rising in the unstable air. In the cabin, flight attendants began securing loose items and checking on passenger comfort. Aurora remained asleep, though her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, suggesting her rest was not entirely peaceful. Her right hand occasionally twitched, fingers moving in small, precise patterns that might have reminded an observer of someone manipulating flight controls. Harrison had finally exhausted his audience's patience and turned to his tablet, though he continued to make small, critical comments whenever the plane encountered rougher air. Pilots taking the lazy approach to this turbulence should be changing altitude more aggressively. 30 minutes later, the situation in the cockpit had evolved from routine anomalies to genuine concern. "Captain, 3 separate systems showing irregularities now," Jake reported, his voice tight with concentration. pattern is inconsistent with any normal fault tree. Sterling's expression darkened. Pull up the passenger manifest. Sir? Just a hunch. Let me see it. As Jake brought up the manifest on his screen, Sterling scanned the names methodically. His eyes stopped abruptly on one entry. Hayes, Aurora J. Seat 2B. It can't be, he muttered, staring at the name. Problem, sir? Before Sterling could answer, a cascade of warning lights illuminated the cockpit. The plane lurched suddenly, banking several degrees to the left before Sterling could correct it. What the hell was that? Jake exclaimed. Multiple system failures, Sterling replied, his voice tense but controlled as he worked the controls. Take manual control of rudder compensation. I'm going to try resetting the electrical distribution. The sudden movement caused several passengers to gasp. Drinks spilled and overhead bins shifted. The turbulence was no longer merely uncomfortable. It was alarming. Aurora's eyes snapped open instantly. Her transition from deep sleep to full alertness occurred in a fraction of a second. Unlike other awakening passengers who looked around in confusion, her gaze was immediately sharp and assessing, scanning the cabin with professional precision. The plane shuddered again. This time, oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments throughout the aircraft. Passengers cried out in alarm as flight attendants began emergency procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and place your oxygen masks over your nose and mouth, came the automated announcement. As chaos erupted around her, Aurora sat perfectly still, her eyes now focused on the cockpit door with an intensity that suggested she was calculating rather than panicking. She didn't immediately reach for her oxygen mask, instead watching the flight attendants' movements and the plane's behavior with analytical calm. Zoe noticed Aurora's unusual reaction amidst the panic. While other passengers scrambled for their masks, some crying or calling out. The woman in 2B appeared to be mentally working through something, her fingers now retrieving a small notebook from her jacket pocket. In the cockpit, alarms blared as Sterling and Jake fought to stabilize the aircraft. Sir, hydraulics failing, backup systems compromised, Jake reported, his voice tight with strain. That's impossible unless someone deliberately, Sterling began, then stopped as realization dawned. His eyes flicked back to the passenger manifest, to the name that had caught his attention moments before. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Jake was thrown against his harness, his head striking the side panel. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead as he struggled to maintain consciousness. Stay with me, Jake, Sterling ordered, but the first officer's eyes were unfocused. The captain made a split-second decision, reaching for his seatbelt release. In the cabin, Harrison's earlier bravado had evaporated. We're going down, he said, his voice high and tight with fear. The pilots have lost control. Aurora glanced at him briefly before returning to the small calculations she was writing in her notebook. Her calm was so incongruous with the surrounding panic that it seemed almost surreal. But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Victoria Stone, a passenger Aurora hadn't noticed before, suddenly stood up from seat 4A. The middle-aged woman with silver hair moved with surprising agility toward the emergency exit row, her medical bag in hand. I'm a trauma surgeon, Dr. Stone announced to the panicking passengers. Everyone stay calm. These aircraft are designed to handle emergencies. For a moment, it seemed like Dr. Stone might take charge of the situation. Several passengers looked to her for guidance, hope flickering in their eyes. But then Captain Sterling burst through the cockpit door, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, and his eyes didn't seek out Dr. Stone. They locked directly onto Aurora. The recognition between them was instantaneous and electric. Firebird, Captain Sterling shouted above the blaring alarms, his voice cutting through the cacophony of terrified passengers. Authorization Delta Crimson 847. We need you now. Dr. Stone froze mid-step, her face showing confusion and something else. Disappointment, perhaps, that she wasn't the solution everyone needed. The cabin fell into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the persistent alarms and the sound of air rushing through oxygen masks. Every head turned toward Aurora Hayes, who remained perfectly still in seat 2B, her expression shifting from analytical calm to grim resolution. Is he talking to you? Harrison asked incredulously, oxygen mask dangling forgotten from his hand. Without answering, Aurora stood, her movements fluid and confident despite the violently shaking aircraft. In one smooth motion, she removed her tailored jacket, revealing a fitted black top that allowed for unrestricted movement. The transformation was subtle but profound, her posture straightening as years of concealed military bearing emerged. "Commander Aurora Hayes, Naval Aviation Experimental Test Squadron," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin without needing to shout. The authority in her tone was unmistakable, silencing even the most panicked passengers. Harrison stared open-mouthed. "Wait, you're Firebird?" "Yes," she confirmed, already moving toward the cockpit, her red hair catching the emergency lighting. "And this aircraft is in serious trouble." Captain Sterling addressed the stunned passengers, steadying himself against the doorframe as the plane continued to shudder. Commander Hayes designed the emergency protocols for this aircraft series, protocols that were never implemented after she was blamed for the Meridian disaster. The name Meridian triggered recognition in several passengers. 3 years ago, an experimental aircraft had suffered catastrophic failure during a test flight. The pilot, never named in public reports, had somehow landed the craft when all simulations indicated it was impossible, saving 4 of the 6 crew members. Nevertheless, the program was scrapped and the pilot discharged under mysterious circumstances. As Aurora moved toward the cockpit, flight attendant Emma blocked her path instinctively, years of training compelling her to keep passengers away from the flight deck. "Ma'am, I can't let you." "She's cleared," Captain Sterling interrupted. "Highest possible authorization." Emma stepped aside, watching in confusion as Aurora entered the cockpit with the confidence of someone returning to a familiar workspace. Dr. Stone, still standing in the aisle, watched this exchange with growing understanding. "You're the scapegoat from Meridian," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Jake was slumped in his seat, semi-conscious. The instrument panel flashed with multiple red warnings, some of which weren't covered in standard emergency procedures. "Status," Aurora demanded, immediately taking the empty first officer's seat and scanning the instruments with practiced efficiency. "Multiple cascading failures," Sterling replied. "No longer captain to passenger, but pilot to pilot. Started with hydraulic system 3, spread to electrical distribution, then backup systems. Nothing in the emergency handbook covers this combination, because it's deliberate sabotage," Aurora stated, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. "Someone targeted the redundancy architecture. These failures aren't random." "How can you be sure?" "Because I designed the security protocols to prevent exactly this scenario." She pointed to a specific pattern on one of the screens. "That sequence doesn't occur naturally. Someone knew exactly where to hit us." In the cabin, passengers clung to their oxygen masks and armrests as the aircraft continued its erratic movement. Harrison sat frozen, his earlier bombast replaced by ashen fear. Across the aisle, investigative journalist Sarah Chun had been quietly observing everything. Now she spoke up, her voice muffled by her oxygen mask. "You're Blake Harrison, aren't you? CEO of Pinnacle Tech." He nodded weakly, grateful for the momentary distraction from their dire situation. "And that woman," Sarah continued, removing her mask briefly. "She's Commander Aurora Hayes, the one who was blamed for Meridian." "What are you talking about?" Harrison asked. Sarah introduced herself. "I'm an investigative journalist. I covered the Meridian disaster. Or rather, I tried to. Most of the details were classified. But that woman in there, she's the pilot who was scapegoated for the crash." But then Dr. Stone approached them, her expression troubled. "There's something else," she said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to be on this flight. My original booking was changed at the last minute, moved from 4A to this exact seat. And I'm guessing," she looked at Aurora's empty seat, "that wasn't coincidence either." Sarah's journalistic instincts sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone wanted specific people on this plane. The question is whether we're all here as witnesses or targets." Harrison's face went pale. "My company, we've been developing new aviation security systems, military contracts, If someone wanted to test a new form of cyber attack on aircraft systems, they'd need the original designer present to see if their attack could be countered. Dr. Stone finished grimly. In the cockpit, Aurora had taken partial control, working in tandem with Sterling to stabilize the aircraft. "We've lost 40% of our hydraulics," she reported, voice steady. "Standard emergency procedures won't work here." "What options do we have?" Sterling asked, fighting the controls as the plane attempted another unexpected bank to the left. 3 years ago, I developed an emergency backup system for precisely this scenario. It was deemed too expensive for implementation across the fleet. Aurora's hands moved across the control panel, accessing systems that weren't in the standard operating manual, but the architecture is still embedded in the aircraft's core systems. "You're saying you can activate features that don't officially exist?" "I designed them. I know where they're buried in the code." Aurora's eyes never left the instruments as she spoke. "But I'll need your help. This is going to be unlike any landing procedure you've ever performed." Back in the cabin, Flight Attendant Emma approached Zoe, who stood transfixed near the cockpit door. "What's happening?" Emma whispered. "Who is that woman?" Before Zoe could answer, the plane dropped suddenly, causing both women to grab nearby seats for stability. Oxygen masks swung wildly from the ceiling panels. "I don't know exactly," Zoe admitted once they'd steadied themselves, but the captain seemed to recognize her immediately. Called her Firebird. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her impromptu briefing to Harrison and nearby passengers. The Meridian program was developing next-generation emergency systems for commercial aircraft. Revolutionary technology that could save planes in situations that are currently unsurvivable. "And she was blamed for its failure?" asked David Park, a businessman who had been quietly listening. "Officially, yes, but my sources suggested she was the only reason anyone survived at all. There were rumors that the test was sabotaged, that she pulled off a landing that should have been physically impossible." Harrison's eyes widened as he processed this information, recalling his earlier condescension toward Aurora. "And now she's flying this plane." "If what I suspect is true," Sarah replied, "she might be the only person in the world who can land it safely." In the cockpit, Aurora had managed to access the hidden emergency systems she designed years earlier. Lines of code scrolled across a secondary screen as she bypassed security protocols with a series of rapid commands. "There," she said, hitting a final key sequence. "We should have partial hydraulic restoration in 3 minutes, but we need to start planning our approach now. Where's the nearest suitable airport?" Sterling consulted the navigation system, which was thankfully still operational. "Denver International is closest, about 127 miles southwest. Too far with our current system's degradation. We need something closer, even if it's smaller. Rollins Municipal in Wyoming, 52 miles north. Single runway, 7,000 feet. Aurora calculated rapidly. "That'll work, but we'll need to dump fuel to reduce landing weight. With compromised electrical systems, that's risky." "Everything about this situation is risky, Commander." "True, but I've landed heavier aircraft on shorter runways with worse damage." Her voice carried absolute conviction. "This is our best option." As they worked to stabilize the aircraft and prepare for an emergency landing, Aurora's mind flashed back briefly to the Meridian incident. The experimental aircraft had exhibited similar failure patterns moments before things went catastrophically wrong. She had saved 4 lives that day but lost 2 others, including her co-pilot. The memory sharpened her focus rather than distracting her. If her suspicions were correct, the same people who had sabotaged the Meridian test were behind this attack. But why this flight? Why now? Her thoughts were interrupted by Captain Sterling. "Denver Air Traffic Control is on the line. They're asking for identification and verification of our emergency status." Aurora took the radio. "This is Commander Aurora Hayes. Call sign Firebird. Authorization code Sierra Tango 92775. We have multiple system failures consistent with deliberate sabotage and are declaring an emergency." There was a pause before the controller responded. "Commander Hayes, our information shows you were grounded permanently following the Meridian incident. Circumstances change when 300 lives are at stake," she replied coolly. We need priority clearance to Rollins Municipal and Emergency Services standing by. Another pause, longer this time. When the controller spoke again, his tone had changed. Understood, Firebird. We're clearing airspace and notifying Rollins. Military escort is being scrambled to your position. Military escort? Sterling questioned after she'd signed off. Standard protocol when sabotage is suspected, Aurora explained, though they both knew there was more to it. Her re-emergence would set off multiple alerts throughout the defense and intelligence communities. In the cabin, Sarah had become an information source about the mysterious Firebird. She was the youngest test pilot ever accepted into the Naval Experimental Squadron, she explained. After Meridian, she disappeared completely. Dr. Stone suddenly spoke up. I'm not just a trauma surgeon. I'm also a whistleblower. 6 months ago, I treated a dying aerospace engineer who confessed. Aurora Hayes was set up. The Meridian sabotage was designed to discredit her emergency systems program. Harrison's face went white. And now someone's trying to finish what they started. The plane stabilized as Aurora's systems came online. In the cockpit, Aurora guided the aircraft toward Rollins Municipal Airport. This isn't coincidence, Sterling said quietly. Someone orchestrated your presence on this flight. Through the window, 2 military jets appeared as escorts. Firebird, this is Raptor 1, came the radio call. Copy, Raptor 1. Possible sabotage situation. As they approached the small Wyoming airfield, Aurora's focus was absolute. The aircraft touched down hard, engines compromised, but her skilled handling kept them on the runway. For tense seconds, metal protested and landing gear strained. Then gradual deceleration. Silence. Then explosive applause from the cabin. That was the finest piece of flying I've ever witnessed, Sterling said quietly. Emergency vehicles surrounded them, military personnel among the responders. Hours later, at Denver International, Aurora sat in the airline lounge watching planes take off. Captain Sterling approached. They've offered me a position heading up a new aviation security task force. I've requested you as my deputy. Aurora watched a Boeing 787 lift into the evening sky. For 3 years, she'd carried undeserved blame. Now she had a chance to reclaim her purpose. On the lounge television, breaking news. Sarah Chen's investigation had exposed the conspiracy. Competing aerospace companies' executives were being arrested. Blake Harrison approached, his arrogance replaced by humility. Commander Hayes, my company would like to fund whatever project you choose next. No strings attached. People can surprise you, Mr. Harrison. Ready to fly again, Firebird? Sterling asked. Aurora smiled, watching the last flights lift into the darkening sky. I never stopped flying, Marcus. I was just grounded temporarily. Tomorrow, the world would know the story of the red-haired pilot who had been sleeping in Seat 2B. But tonight, Firebird watched the planes fly, knowing she belonged in the sky. The woman who had hidden for 3 years was hiding no more. The sky was calling her home.